So by way of kicking things off, Alan, if it's all right, I thought I might come to you first. And this is really following on for the conversation that was started in the SASIG webinar, which was held this morning on a similar topic. So Alan, when did you first realize that COVID-19 was going to have a profound impact on your organization? And going back to that time, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think the initial reports that came out of China, my first thought was there's no such thing as a localized pandemic anymore. This is the modern world. Everyone's on an airplane, everyone's traveling. I knew as soon as it became a thing in China, it was going to become a thing here. And as to what we first did for it, we certainly went and grabbed all of our disaster recovery and business continuity plans, got all those on the table, refreshed ourselves on what was in them, and got ready. The biggest effort I think we saw was the flip over, because keep in mind too, and I wanted to clarify, I'm not the CISO at NTT. I'm at NTT Data Services, which is one of the subsidiaries. And I'm the delivery CISO there, meaning I'm the CISO in charge of our client estates, securing our client estates. And so when work from home was clearly going to be on the table, I had a huge challenge in front of me, not just to get my own company flipped over to work from home, but to assist all of my clients to do the same. And so there was quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of work over the course of a few weeks getting the client estate. We ourselves got flipped over in literally just a few days' time. But getting my client base and assisting them in flipping over took weeks. Very, very long, very, very tiring weeks.
I can imagine. And it's a really good point that people were kind of having to manage their incident response phases at different timeframes, as people had to flip quickly and others had to go slowly. Coming to you, Ellie, obviously your job has responsibility across regions, not just Singapore. If that's the question, how did you meet the same challenge then of trying to manage kind of a unilateral response to COVID-19 at the start?
Yeah, well, look, I guess there was a phased approach, wasn't there? Because it happened in different countries at different times. I mean, we are a global organization. We're based here in Singapore. Obviously, we're used to the SARS outbreak back in the early noughties. So I think already there was an awareness around, to Alan's point, pandemics don't stay localized. So I think initially we put everything in place from a global point of view, and then as each countries were impacted differently at different stages, we made sure as well that we had to deploy as fast as we could the technology to enable people to work from home, but also from a security awareness point of view, we had to really up our security awareness around working from home, working remotely, making sure that people were using the right video conferencing apps, not sharing information just because they're outside of a physical office environment. And I think when you go out of a physical office environment, attitudes change. When you're in an office, you've got your security pass, you walk into an office every day, you're in your work environment. When you're working from home, especially at the moment where people are doing home-based schooling, they've got all sorts of different stresses going on. You really have to help your employees understand that it's even more important to be cyber aware throughout their daily workings. So yeah, and it has been a global effort. We work in more than 70 countries and Standard Chartered Bank. First of all, we had to look at it from a technology point of view, just the sheer enormity, as Allan was saying, the sheer enormity of provisioning laptops to a global workforce, and making sure that people were really aware about what they could and couldn't do from home. And then we'll probably touch on it later, but just the people aspect as well. It's not just the technology and the logistics, you then got to think about the mental well-being of your staff and how do you support them virtually as well. So yeah, all sorts of challenges.
I think you're absolutely right. And if I may just follow on from that, you mentioned, obviously having to get many new processes and you mentioned video conferencing in place very quickly. Now, the video conferencing conversation has, at least in the UK, it's definitely continued as people try and work out how they're comfortable to communicate. Is there any advice you'd give at the kind of the bank's experience at trying to make kind of this is what's okay, this is what's not so much okay?
Absolutely. You've just got to be crystal clear about what the risks are and what you can and what you can't do. I don't think there can be any grey areas. We're very strong on giving very specific guidance. This is what you can do, this is what you can't do. I think you have to be absolutely explicit. You have to have bite-sized, really simple communications readily available. We've implemented a bunch of things. We have a little thing called a Cyber Wiki, where people just go to for everything. So anything to do with working from home, we've got a little Cyber Wiki where people can go. It might link them to all other places at the bank, but just to really make it really, really simple. People under enormous pressure at the moment. You've got kids in the background and you're dealing with the stresses of working from home. You've just got to make it as simple and as bite-sized and as plain English as possible. And you've got to make sure that you give them the tools, and you've got to make sure that it's really, really clear about what they can and what they can't do. Just help them do their jobs, help them be secure.
A really strong approach, or a really strong focus on delivery then as the key to success when you're getting the cybersecurity message out there. Ian, if I could come to you quickly, and again, thinking about the start of COVID, as organizations began to respond to COVID-19, we know that cyber criminal groups did the same. Now, you obviously are keyed into the intel side of things. Did you notice any trends, maybe how quickly cybersecurity became a target, or at least the COVID aspects of it became a target?
Yeah, so initially we saw Asian cybercrime syndicates, ones in Vietnam, and some Indian activity all starting to target China. And we suspected that this was going to be kind of a big deal, especially when the broader perspective started to be put out that there were intelligence reports amongst the five.
Oh, I'm afraid I think we may have lost Ian there for a second. Hopefully his feed will come back to us shortly.
Upswing.
There you go. Apologies, Ian. We just dropped out for a second there.
Okay.
Please carry on though. You're back.
Oh, great. We saw an upswing in cyber criminal activity and what became the smorgasbord, if you will, of cybercrime activity ranging from very overt fake testing kits to very covert activity taking place by nation-state actors along two lines. One, pretty much destabilization and psychological operations, and then on the other, pure smash and grab attempts at various companies. And as it increased in frequency and became the story of the day, we saw the time, if we like to call it in military terms, flash to bang. But as soon as government programs were announced or there was a discussion around a particular drug, within 4 to 5 hours, phishing sites were set up and email was flowing from the bad guys trying to entice people. So a massive increase in fraud across all spectrums and an increase in cyber criminal actor and nation state actors.
I think that's a really important point because it really feeds into the fact that any kind of global narrative is something that cybersecurity professionals should be aware of, because it will always be a jumping off spot for people who want to engage and ultimately trick people, social engineer them, however you choose to call it. But that's some really useful advice. I'm aware that we've got some questions already. Rich, have we got any questions you want to pitch to the panelists at the moment?
Yeah, we've got a few. Some have kind of half been covered already, so I'll try and combine a couple. So the first one really is, with everything else that's going on in the world right now, is cybersecurity that important? And as a follow-on to that, how do you then get that message across to your staff?
Great question. And I think as it's a message to staff, Ellie, if I could ask you to field that one.
Well, look, if nothing else, the heightened awareness around the importance of good cyber hygiene has been probably the single biggest learning we've had from this. You know, we've had to mobilize, companies have had to mobilize tens of thousands of people, haven't they, who were used to walking into the office, having their VPN available, and suddenly we're asking people to work from home offices where it may have very patchy internet connection. They might having to be used some kind of local Wi-Fi. So we're having to really drum home the message of important cybersecurity. So the heightened awareness that has resulted of this is there. How do we then continue that as a way of working? And we're now trying to make sure that we're also looking at ways to engage our employees differently. Whereas before we would run on the ground activities, you know, lunch and learn sessions in the office. We'd have people dropping in doing phishing clinics. We have a network of about 500 plus security champions in the bank, right the way across the globe. I mean, believe it or not, people in the Falklands, people in Macau, who are information security champions, they help us amplify our message to local countries. A really fantastic network of volunteers. They're all remote now. So, you know, you can't turn to your local champion and say, hey, you know, I think I got this phishing email, what should I do about it? So we're having to really explore different ways of getting our message out there to employees. We're using videos, a lot of videos, doing lunch and learn sessions on video conferencing, making sure we're doing little quizzes. And it's really, really important that we don't create a culture of fear. People are under enormous pressure. And, you know, we want to be the company that engages and educates and empowers people. We don't want to add an additional layer of stress, do we? So we're offering little incentives, you know, to try and encourage people to take up our learning journeys. We had a big uptake last week. We offered a little voucher, said, you know, if you want to learn a bit more about phishing, go and take this learning journey, look at this infographic. We did a little hacking demo video, just to show what really happens when people get into your systems, you know, explain the risks, help them understand how they can protect your organization, you know. And we never ever use the word weakest link. We always talk about strongest line of defense. You know, we never talk about repeat offenders. We talk about how can you be a security agent. You know what, that's just as relevant, probably even more so now when people are not in the physical work environment. So we just got to help them do their job securely and make them feel good about it and not create a culture of fear. I'd love to hear what my fellow panelists have. I see a couple of nods going on, so I'd love to know what their views are on this.
Feel free to jump in, or I can ask Richie to pose us another tricky question, but I think that was excellently answered. And in fact,
Really good.
Summarized there, more, not less awareness has actually taken place, it seems, over the last few months.
It has to be. It has to be. To Ellie's point, we've distributed, you know, a lot of businesses were prepared for the dissolution of the perimeter, and a lot weren't. But the bottom line is the perimeter's gone now. The endpoint is the perimeter. It's a very different world.
Never coming back.
It's never coming back. It's over. So either you were prepared for it or you're scrambling to adapt to it now. And in either case, awareness is so key. To Ellie's point, maybe they're using unsecure Wi-Fi in a coffee shop. Maybe their home router hasn't been updated in 5 years. You don't know what the circumstances are on the periphery. So you have to have, you know, in my shop, we have this lovely little mantra: see it, manage it, secure it. And you have to have the tools to be able to do those three things, right? You've got to have that remote visibility, that remote management. Can you health check? Can you push patches? Can you update and get it to a healthy state? And then lastly, can you secure it? And in the modern world of SaaS-based tools, I think that these things are all very doable, but not everybody was there. And so there's a lot of scrambling right now. I think, you know, like VPN, a lot of people relied strictly on VPN for their integration back to the mothership. And with this many employees suddenly hitting the periphery, VPN got oversaturated. People weren't ready for it. So they enabled split tunnel, right? So there's decisions being made that are having security implications, and modern tooling and technologies that need to be embraced, I think, to overcome some of those challenges.
I would say, based on the metrics that we've seen, especially what was thrown up on Shodan about 3 weeks into the crisis, we saw over 250,000 new RDP servers and Outlook Web Access put straight out on the internet with no geofencing whatsoever. Many of those boxes were unpatched, and we watched remote code execution vulnerabilities on remote desktop suddenly explode in their, I'm going to say, the cyber criminals embraced that to drop ransomware on some pretty serious organizations in the midst of a global pandemic. So, you know, to Allan and Ellie's point, cybersecurity became a business critical issue. Overnight, IT and IT security departments became the reason why the business could continue to be in business. And, you know, we saw everything from, well, some companies essentially ended up having to turn several hundred daycares, you know, users working at home, into branch offices. And that happened. And, you know, the repercussions of that, we're still going to feel them. You know, we have a couple of very interesting things on the horizon about Internet of Things and how all of these, you know, Internet of Things devices are now on your corporate network. So really, really, the threat landscape just changed dramatically in the past 10 weeks.
Yeah, and maybe just to continue to that, Ian, I'm sure phishing is going to come up, but you know, I think we saw, I think that the percentage being cited is something like 660+% increase in COVID-related phishing attacks. I mean, you know, this is just a gold mine, isn't it, for threat actors? And they're going to be going after that fear. They're going to be going after that uncertainty.
They're also
who wants to lose their Netflix streaming, right? So they're going to offer, you know, trying to get you to share your account information to maintain your Netflix. I mean, they are going for it. So we have to arm our employees with more information as possible.
there's another aspect to why they embraced it. They knew everybody would be desperate for COVID-19 information. So we couldn't filter, you couldn't put a filter into your organization that, that blacklisted everything that mentioned
Right.
COVID-19, because we actually needed legitimate information. So they dialed us in, and they dropped all sorts of cyber stuff on our position very effectively.
Which is, again, that's a good example of needing to stay abreast of the global narrative, because of course, as that happens, you can see there's going to be an obvious, if you like, weak spot for criminal groups to take advantage of. I mean, I was interested by both of your points there, because a lot of what we've just talked about in terms of response, what we had to acknowledge really was that we had to compromise when we responded. I mean, even the subject of VPN splitting and so forth. So bringing us into where we are now, as it were, organizations broadly have their COVID response in place now. And the question has become, where do we focus now? So how would you guys advise organizations to be looking at the security now they've, if you like, finished their initial response phase? And if I will start with you, Allan.
All right, so I think the tooling is largely in place now. Like I said, either folks had it or they're getting it rapidly, and they know their plan and they're getting that nailed down. And I think Ellie's world is really where the bulk of the future rests. It's all about the human side, the education, the awareness. Don't fall for this fake WHO email. Stay cognizant, stay alert, keep yourself patched, secure your home network, be cognizant when you're in a coffee shop. Even little stuff like having conversations on the cell phone in public, what kind of information is being gleaned, getting that level of awareness and getting folks to understand I'm still at the office, even though I'm not at the office, and internalizing that from a security perspective. I really think that's the bulk of it.
I think, Ellie, as you were mentioned there as well, I'm sure you have thoughts on that subject.
I mean, what he said, plus, I mean, it's so true, isn't it? I think actually the challenge is going to be, and I think we're probably going to come on to future states in a bit, the challenge is going to be, we think we've had a challenging few months already. Well, imagine when they start, we just found out tonight in Singapore, for example, that after almost 3 months of lockdown, there will be a lifting of phase 2, or the phase 2 will be lifted as of midnight this Friday. So of course you could hear a collective cry around Singapore going, yippee. But with that, there's the cyber part of me going, we're going to have all these people that can't go back to an office environment, but can go to their local cafe, get away from their homeschooling of their children. And, then you've got public Wi-Fi and public hotspots you're connecting to. So, and, not going to airports for any time, for a long time, but you are going to be in public environments that you haven't been able to go to for several months. So you really want to make sure that when people are moving from their home environment to possibly a hybrid working environment, such as cafes and other places that aren't in the office but not at home, you really got to help them understand that it's even more important, as you say, when you're having conversations in a public environment, maybe you're not worried about VPN, you've got to really keep on continuing to reinforce these to your employees. And we try and do it in a very non-spamming way, right? You've got to make it engaging. We're using gamification. We're trying to do rewards and incentives, and we've got to get our employees to be part of the conversation. You cannot just say, don't do this, don't do that. You want to give clear guidelines, don't you? But you want to get them part of the conversation. And we're just leveraging our champion network as much as we can to really sort of run virtual sessions on the ground. We did a great one on home network security recently, and just the amount of interest in that, and how do people make sure they've got their really strong home network set up? Kids are very good at changing admin on family devices, right, without you knowing about it. So, all these extra challenges you're suddenly facing. So how do we arm them and help them do that in a way that helps them do their job? Yeah.
I think we've certainly all been there where you come home and something has been changed and it takes you the rest of the day to work out what it is. But I was interested, Ellie, that you mentioned, obviously, there's been a change in Singapore's stance very recently. Now, for all three of you, your responsibilities, as you said at the start, are really multinational, not really just part of a region. And for Ellie, particularly, you're managing an awareness campaign that stretches over many countries. How are you managing what may be different realities for different countries?
Well, look, the pandemic is different rates in different countries. Obviously, there's going to be different government responses. There's going to be different regulatory requirements, especially as a financial institution. It was very clear early on when the circuit breaker was imposed in Singapore. Singapore government very, very clear about what needs to be done. It was made very clear, we couldn't go into the office unless we had, permission from CEO. It was very clear about what could be done, very, very clear guidelines. Other countries, less so, right? More about guidances and what you might be able to do. And as we know, in the UK, there was quite a bit of confusion early on about what could be done and couldn't be done. So I think governments play obviously a really, really critical role, don't they, in providing clear guidance. And, I'm a Brit living in Singapore, very clear guidance in Singapore, no grey area at all. UK, less so. So I think on top of that, as a bank or as any company, we also have to make sure that people are very clear what the company stance is. We had right from day one, we're a bank. We have business continuity in our DNA, right? We're used to invoking business continuity plans. Usually, though, they're done at a single event or a single country. Suddenly, we were looking at a global invocation of a business continuity plan. I think we just had to make sure that from a country point of view, it was a global message, but it was locally relevant and locally delivered. So a lot of country management teams, coming in with their local flavor, very strong support at the country level. I think it's always going to be a balance, isn't it? As you're an international company, how do you provide global management tone from the top and then deliver it in a way that's culturally relevant as well as locally relevant, depending on what stage of the pandemic or lockdown you're at. I don't know what Allan and Ian have to say for where they're based.
Well, Ian, if I could just come to you very quickly, and again along the same lines, COVID-19 maybe started as a global narrative, but you could argue that increasingly it's become a regional narrative as certain places go into lockdown while other tensions are easing. What are your opinions about, obviously, Ellie's challenge, but also has the intelligence changed as different areas begin to have their own story?
Yeah, absolutely. So without being accused of pandering to my audience, police budgets need to be massively increased along the lines of fraud and anti-fraud capability. This is because one of the, I would say, bow shock waves from the announcement of all of these government programs is cyber criminal actors taking advantage of those government programs. We recently saw a Nigerian crew that managed to get into, in the United States, some state unemployment benefit systems, register thousands of people, and claim benefits fraudulently. That, to me, is the cyber tip of the old iceberg. I think, in retrospect, and I have to agree with Ellie on the clarity, when we had governments announce various programs, this was all fantastic, and I think this was really necessary to sort of balance the idea of lockdown in the economy and the economic realities. But I think where something kind of got lost was the communication outside of the government apparatus. And I'll give you a quick example. When the government sort of assumed that everyone could order groceries online and have them delivered, that was a bit naive when you looked at that the UK at the beginning of the pandemic, only about 10 to 15% of folks were ordering and having their groceries delivered online. So to expect the various companies overnight to be able to scale up that capacity and deal with perhaps some legacy tech debt in their infrastructure and in their web applications was naive. And then I think for us in the threat intelligence space, it became very apparent on what countries needed, no matter what stage of the pandemic they were at. And that really translated into internet. So we were very focused on attacks on 5G infrastructure during that period of time, and all of the nonsense and propaganda that was fed. We were very focused on transportation and distribution, especially of the food networks for some of our clients. And then, of course, and Ellie can probably attest to this, attacks on the financial services sector in terms of fraudulent phishing, massive amounts of SMS phishing sent from actors globally. So, we could see all of these trends and pretty much knew what we needed to protect from the get-go across the global estate.
I think that's a really good answer. And I think certainly looking at the intelligence that's been coming out around COVID-19, there have been both global and regionally relevant strands for everyone to key into, and really important that they do so. Rich, I'm conscious that we haven't asked for any questions from the floor for a while. So while we've got the pause, is there anything that we should be answering from our attendees?
Yeah, there's a couple in relation to the intelligence side of things. And the main one is probably, do we always see the cybercrime trend follow a large-scale event like COVID-19? Is that always the case?
Quick answer, yes.
Yes.
Allan, do you want to maybe elaborate a little? I totally agree with the answer, but is there any more you want to say about the subject? Or?
Oh, it's just any event, positive or negative, that's large is going to have a trail of cybercrime in its wake. Anything that garners public attention, that garners interest, right? How do the bad guys attack us via phishing? They appeal to our curiosity, they appeal to our greed, they appeal to our fear of authority, right? And any kind of circumstance that might be able to invoke any of those three, of course, they're going to take advantage. And something this large and this negative, where again, as we said before, the workforce of the world is scattered to the four winds. Well, that four winds is certainly an area to sniff around and explore if you're a bad guy as well. So I think absolutely.
I think that's definitely good advice to take forward. As I say, in any event we deal with going forward, this is likely to reoccur, albeit it will be specific to that event. This mapping on to trends that are going on in the narrative space will happen with cyber criminals using them to get into staff. Richie, any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple which will lead on into the whole future side of things. So I'll hold those for the second. But one has just come in.
Okay.
And basically asked, would daily updated websites with examples of current scams be effective in helping the general public? And if so, should it just be contained as one, or should that then be split into sections such as HMRC, NHS, etc.?
If I come to you, Ellie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the subject and how best to kind of get the message out where the scams are happening and how to communicate that to people.
Well, I guess there's going to be at a government level, isn't there? You mentioned HMRC and NHS, and there's going to be at a company level. I mean, certainly I can say probably from a company level, we try and make sure that we're providing information in essential sites so people know where to go, one place to go. We have, the site that my team runs where people can go for the latest information. And then, of course, from a government point of view, just, we have in Singapore, we have our, 2 or 3 times a day, our WhatsApps message comes through from gov.sg with all the information. There's always frequently a security angle as well. So we look on, there's one site in Singapore where we all go for the latest information, especially around sort of phishing attempts, as you say, WHO and sort of other fake phishing attempts that are coming through. They're always trying to heighten their awareness by sending us WhatsApp messages on that one as well. So I think it's always going to be a balance between what your company can do to raise awareness for your employees, and then putting that country lens on what your government can do as well.
I think that's a really good answer. I also think for people here who are attending from the UK, some places you might consider looking. Action Fraud, the website there contains a lot of useful material on current phishing campaigns if you're interested in keeping yourself up to speed. I would also head over to the NCSC website, where they do weekly reports about developing fields of malware, but they also talk about phishing, and therein they also have business and individuals advice on cybersecurity. So all good places to check out. I should mention as well, actually, that Allan on our panel here has a webinar of his own, which I highly recommend, called Defense in Depth. And I will put that in the link for you shortly. Again, if you want to read up on cybersecurity and get more of Allan's thoughts, I highly recommend heading over, which does rather segue me nicely into my next question, and it is for you, Allan. Throughout the webinar series, we've had this asked a number of ways, but really I would summarize it as the leadership question. People out there are very interested to know, how does cybersecurity find its place, not just in the company in general, but really in the COVID-19 conversation? So do you have any thoughts on leadership generally and any advice you'd give our attendees?
Sure. So I think the most important and most critical thing is that you have to, as a cybersecurity leader, recognize that you are a leader in the business, which means you are a business leader. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it's a shift of mental thinking. I'm not a cybersecurity leader, I'm a business leader. And that means I have a seat at the table. Whether they've given me one or not, I have one. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice I get, I know a lot of CISOs who feel like they're not empowered enough, who feel like they don't have a seat at the big kids table. And so one of the things I advise is, insert yourself wherever you can. That's number one. And come in with a business perspective. Don't come in with a cyber perspective. Technology should be the last thing you talk about. Risks should be the second thing you talk about, but the first thing you talk about should be business, right? It should be the organization's mission. And this even applies to government and whomever else. There's an organizational mission that should be your number one focal point, followed by risk, followed by technology. And if you can't get a seat at the table, create your own table is my next piece of advice. I'm a big believer in creating a cybersecurity council. Run around the organization. Find a vice president from absolutely every nook and cranny of the company. Here's someone from HR, someone from legal. Explain to them how they have ownership in cyber and how it's a business mission, and get their input, get their concerns, get a collective perspective on it, and start reporting up the results of that upstairs. It's really nice to have the business backing you. And to create a situation where they are backing you. But more importantly, and this is my last thought on this one is, I keep saying the business. It's really important, if you're going to truly internalize this, you're not here to enable the business. You're here to be the business as a cybersecurity leader. And I think that's the most critical piece. If you can truly internalize that, you've already got a huge leg up on your peers who are still struggling.
I don't know if anyone can add to that answer. I certainly can't. But Ellie, any thoughts on the big leadership?
Well, no pressure. But look, I mean, it's a topic that is close to every cyber professional's heart, isn't it? And I could not agree more with Allan. I mean, it's for so long, cyber was the technology problem, and there's just been a fundamental shift. I mean, in the last 3 months, that shift has just been accelerated even more, right? So we all know that it's a business issue, and if you can go and have that conversation and talk about the risks and start with your clients. I mean, if I think about the banking sector, for example, it's all about trust. We've been working with generations of families for over 150 years in 70 countries. You do that based on trust, right? And you're protecting your customers' wealth. And every single thing that you do when you work for a financial institution is to protect your customers' wealth, right? And that's based on trust. And if cybersecurity is nothing else, it's based on trust. You've got to be able to protect assets, protect data, protect systems, really look after your crown jewels, make sure you put all the appropriate controls, human and technology around those, and just continue to offer that seamless service to your clients. And Alan's absolutely right. If you can't go in and have that conversation at the business level with your leaders, then you're not a leader yourself. And certainly I've seen a significant shift over the last few years in that sort of the light coming on. It's not a technology issue, it is a business issue. And it's enabled us to have, all of us, I think, as cyber leaders, to have a very different type of conversation around the table when you're talking about risk management rather than technology. You're just going to open a lot more doors if you talk about risks and business than if you go and try and lead with a technology point of view.
I feel almost bad for doing this, Ian, because we've now had 2 superb answers to the leadership question, but I am going to put you on the spot. Is there anything you'd like to add around that very well explored question?
So I think there's a couple of things that kind of enhance what Allan and Ellie have said. The first is if you're not good at communications skills, get some, because your job is not to come charging into the boardroom with your hair on fire. Your job is to actually calmly explain what the situation is and come with a solution. Don't just kind of say, the sky's falling, it's COVID, blah. That's not going to help you. What is going to help you is say, there are a number of things that we can do right now to lessen the impact of whatever it is you're talking about. The other thing that I think is super important is have some trust and faith in your employees to do the right thing. If you're going to sit there and always think that they're out to get you, which is a cybersecurity mindset, unfortunately, that comes into place. We need to break out of that situation. I'm a big believer in looking at and developing my own team, because after this, I'm going to say 20 plus years of being in this business, I'm out of knowledge and I'm all about the wisdom now. I don't know the latest and greatest things about taking out clouds and cloud security compromise and stuff like that. But I'll go and look for that skill set, and I'll encourage that person to develop a voice of reason, and I'll advocate for them when they hand me a report that says there's thousands upon thousands of records exposed for one of our clients, and I now have to go to that client as part of a senior leadership team and explain to them that they've had a little bit of an oopsie. and we need to fix that right away. So for me, it's like, figure out what the problem is. And I guess one last thing that I'll add is, think about your brand and what you want people to be saying about you. So conduct yourself accordingly, right? If you want to be known as a trustful bank to deal with, or a solution provider extraordinaire, or an intelligence provider, be accessible to your clients, and don't try and poo-poo what they're worried about, but assure them that you've got the right technology, the right people, and the right organization to look after you. And I think you'll be really successful as a cybersecurity leader.
Well, there you go. You've bucked the trend. I didn't think there was possibly another great answer you could give there, but you have. So well done for that, Ian.
Well, two great answers, and then I get to editorialize a little bit. And you know, we're printing the book.
I see. Well, we'll have the link to the book out shortly, I'm sure. Just before we head into the final section then, Rich, I don't know if we've had any more questions, but this would be a good point just to pause and see if we've got any questions from the floor.
Yeah, so bearing in mind that you're now going into what the future holds, there are a couple of questions in relation to that. So I'll ask them both at the same time. So the first one is, what are the long-term benefits of changing working practices as a result of this pandemic? And secondly, should people or organizations be planning now for future catastrophes, or just kind of react to them as and when they happen?
Wow, two very big questions. If I could start by asking the first question then, so the long-term benefits that we can get out of this situation of home working. And if I could start with you, Ellie, what's your thoughts on that subject?
Oh, I love that question. I really do. I mean, I hate, as much as I don't like to use the word benefits, because it has been such an insidious experience, hasn't it, for everybody? I mean, lives have been lost, you know, whole economies have been impacted. But there have certainly been, out of this troublesome time, some new ways of working that we can't just turn the switch off and go back to what we were doing before. So we'll call it, for the sake of today, you know, benefits that we've learned. I mean, there are a number of ways. I mean, there's some fantastic articles recently. I don't know if you read the Barack Obama one about the 8 benefits that have come out of this, you know, in terms of work-life balance. Some would say it's got worse, not better, because we're working from home and we have no boundaries. But a lot of people are saying, you know, some of the stresses, although there are other new stresses like home-based schooling and trying to hold down a full-time job, which for women in particular has been a huge challenge. There are also some ways that have improved lives, you know, in terms of not having to do those commutes, in terms of being able to work from home and having a flexi work environment. And if you haven't seen that article from Barack Obama, and it really is a great read. It's quite a short read, but it really kind of touches on the 8 benefits, if you like, that have come out of this. So from our side, I would say, let's collectively say, isn't it just incredible what has been done in the last 3 months? I mean, if you said to any IT leader, any security professional 3 months ago, you would deploy, you know, tens of thousands of people to work from home across tens of countries within a month, you just wouldn't have believed it, you know. And if you'd said you would have had to provision laptops and you know, bumped up your network capability and rolled out new video conferencing apps, you just wouldn't have believed it. So I do think it's worth acknowledging that some feats of just inhumane efforts have been achieved, right? And they should be applauded, and we should continue those ways of working for sure. I mean, I'm sure all companies are right in the middle of talking about how do you have a short and medium term approach to returning back to work, and what does that look like? And I doubt very much for any company it's going to be going back to what it was before, you know, whether that's working from home standards, whether that's flexi work. You know, I think there's going to be all sorts of new ways of working that people are going to be exploring, whether you're a financial institution or a you know, a company operating in a single country. So yeah, I'll pause that to let the other panelists talk about benefits and then come on to sort of future crises.
Well, yeah, let's, for a second, we'll come to the crises, as you say, in a second, but along the same lines, Ian, and I'm just changing the question very slightly, but future benefits of home working, which Ellie's just gone through, is it even as simple as going back to work? Is it, will companies go back to where they went from, or is, you know, how much of a hybrid approach do you think we're going to look at in the future?
Well, you know, I'd love to be able to look into the crystal ball and make some prognostications, as my job is. First thing I would do is short commercial real estate and short commercial real estate firms that have debt financed it. I think work from home is exactly it. It will be a de facto standard, especially in industries where knowledge workers are in short supply, and we can kind of demand these kind of bonuses. On the other side of the fence, expect wages to go down, simply because you know, the ultimate setup in London is to be able to live 2 hours away from London and enjoy the benefits of, you know, the country and the lower cost of pints in the pub when those open again, to, you know, living in central London and making that commute. And so I think we're going to see a huge shift in what people value in terms of work environments. We're going to see an increase in the level of trust required of organizations in terms of their employees. And I think, you know, to quote I think it was the president of Barclays Bank, who is busy sitting there wondering what the value of packing 6,000 people into spaces of, you know, 1 meter squares in massive cube farms, if there is any value left in that kind of panopticon approach to business. So I think we're going to see a whole bunch of interesting trends and studies come out of this. And I think our ability to reach out to talent that is, you know, in communities all over the UK and employ them gainfully will be something new. And to be honest, when I see advertisement in LinkedIn that says the words, you know, this is an on-site position, you're done.
Right.
Your company has failed and you don't even know it yet.
Yep. I think for cyber, there's two real benefits here, and one of those is precisely what Ian just spoke about. We've talked about the cybersecurity shortage of personnel for years now. For 3 years now, everyone's been, oh, the shortage of personnel, and everyone's all freaking out. And now companies that used to insist on, you know, you must be based where the company headquarters are, they can cast their net globally at this point. I can hire someone in Berlin. I can hire someone in Romania. I can hire someone in India. I can hire someone, and it's going to be a lot easier for me to fulfill my roles without that self-imposed restriction, right? So I think that's one huge benefit. And then the other piece specific to cyber, I think that we've seen change here is we've ripped off the Band-Aid, right? Everyone knows that metaphor. You can peel it off slowly and it really, really, really hurts. But when it comes to work from home, when it comes to BYOD, when it comes to dissolving the perimeter, when it comes to securing at the endpoint and not at the infrastructure, we've ripped off the Band-Aid. We're there now. As a world, we're there now. This is the new normal, is scattered to the four winds, as I said before. And so I think that's been a huge benefit and a huge gain for us.
Yeah, and look, just adding on to the people aspect, and we probably come on to this later, but I think one of the other things we've learned is, and it did come up in the Obama article, was that they, as you know, it was a Forbes article that talks about the financial crisis was a CFO problem. This is more of an HR problem. And I think that's quite interesting because it puts the focus really on people. And we've just talked about, you know, the hiring and the opening up of borders, that it's firmly back on the people now, right? And if people are going to continue to work from home, we've also had to think about how we support them. Companies have had to think about the mental well-being of their employees. And I've been just absolutely bowled over, just in my own personal experience working in the bank, of the level of support that has come from, you know, our management team, from our colleagues. You know, we have virtual sessions, the amount of communications and support offerings and funding, you know, public funding available for our communities that we work in around the globe. It's just been absolutely heartwarming. And that's happened on top of all the other challenges that we've had to face. So I think there are other benefits that we realize actually there are, you know, this is a human issue and people have just absolutely stepped up, and it's been incredible, actually. It really has. And, you know, I think if we can look to those and see how we can continue those, not just ways of working, but ways of being, ways of behaving and connecting to each other, it's just fantastic. So let's continue those as we put them into our future facing strategies.
I think those are all excellent answers, particularly as you say, because it's put a focus back on people, which does actually, I do have a question I want to ask, but I feel like we can't ignore the question that has already been asked. So I'll return to that. I believe the question was, should we be planning for future catastrophes now? Rich, was that right? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So yeah, so the question is, should we be planning for future catastrophes now? And Allan, I know you mentioned business continuity at the start, as did you, Ellie. Allan, if you want to, any kind of answer you've got for that?
Yeah, of course we should be planning. If anything, this is a lesson learned, this whole event. How prepared we were for this one, we should all have an internal viewpoint of that and know where we stand. We should be better prepared for the next one. It's not always going to be global. It's not always going to be a full-scale pandemic or something that affects us this much. But back to the regional and the global nature of how we do business, you know, you're going to have tornadoes, you're going to have hurricanes, you're going to have monsoons, you're going to have floods and fires, and, you know, be prepared for these kinds of events. Work on it. Know it's out there. Know it's coming. Whatever caught you flat-footed this time, learn from that. Make that a lessons learned, and incorporate that in your next round of thinking for whatever the future might hold. Absolutely, we should be future focused on this.
And Ian, any thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, I'm just going to pop up a link right now. So read the book, The Uninhabitable Earth. Never read it before bed because you will not be able to sleep, and start figuring out how your business is going to adapt to those trends, because there are more things to happen. There are more bad things coming at, you know, a local level, like Allan had said, but also at a global level as well. And in my mind, we have, you know, the cyber and the geopolitical, which are all interlinked. And what we see is countries reacting to these economic and geopolitical trends. We are into a fist fight with China over intellectual property and 5G and all that kind of stuff. Where that's going to go, we're not sure. It is having huge repercussions in the ability of our economies to recover. And I think the final piece that I'll add here is that governments all over the globe are going to have to look at how they responded to this crisis. And I think there is going to be a citizen movement where we will not forgive our governments for dropping the ball a second time. What I like to say in cyber is that your first pen test is not a problem, but the second pen test that has identified the issues that were present in the first pen test is the true problem. And so I don't think we will stand for governments that continue to reduce investment in the public service and capacities of our healthcare systems. And I think, you know, for my colleagues in the United States, they need to look at how they're delivering healthcare and the cost of healthcare to their masses, because you can get infected from a rich person or a poor person. It doesn't discriminate. So I feel like we're in a way that we've had an opportunity to decide how we're going to approach future perils. And I sincerely hope that our governments recognize the seriousness of this and the ability to sustain, you know, life on this planet ultimately in one form or another. So I think we've learned a lot. I think there's a lot more challenges that are going to be thrown at us in the next 20, 25, 30 years. And I'm hopeful that we'll have learned some valuable lessons from what we faced.
So I think it's a very strong theme there coming through of absolutely yes is the answer to the question, and that your business continuity should include the possibility of there being further disasters down the line, albeit that we see there are some great positives that have come out of this and a lot of learning we've gained from going through it in lifetime, as it were. I also should add that we didn't get to Ian before the webinar, and we didn't tell him to say that you should invest in the public sector. I feel he's gotten away with it twice now. I just want to point out we haven't done any worked on him at all for that. That's just his view. So I'm conscious that we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we've answered everyone's questions. So Rich, one more time, are there any other questions that we need to be looking at?
We have two that are sitting at the top that have been liked, so I'm just going to ask those ones, as we probably won't be able to get to the other ones. But so the first one is, what new risks do you think have emerged as a result of the new working from home reality? And a second one is a more specific question. Someone asking whether there are any good ransomware awareness training for employees when their awareness budgets have been squeezed at the moment.
Okay. So if we go through your first question, which was, are there any examples of the risks being merged as a result of home working? Allan, if you've got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've already sort of dusted over some of this anyway. You know, first and foremost is the endpoint, the end user is now a more ripe target than they used to be. They're more easily hit in the sense of public Wi-Fi and hotspots and these sorts of things. And you know, back to what I said earlier about maybe their home network is not secure. Communication distribution is something all companies are having to ramp up right now, and taking advantage of those weakened centralized communications. You know, one can slip something into the stream. To Ellie's point about always be client focused, well, somebody can send what appears to be a client email. You know, there's a lot of attacks that are coming in regarding communications, a lot more phishing attacks and ransomware attacks and things coming in via email. And I think those are the two main areas where we've seen an increase.
I think, and Ellie, anything to add to that?
Well, I think just the other sort of slightly less obvious one, I mean, certainly the phishing ones is just the sheer volume of increase in phishing attacks globally has just been phenomenal, hasn't it? And we can't ignore that. I think there are some other sort of slightly less obvious ones I mentioned earlier about, you know, you're not in a physical office anymore. So, you know, when we go into the office, we swipe our card, and we're in our suits, and, you know, we know we're in a bank, and, you know, we know, we can see posters around us reminding us how to act, and we can talk with our colleagues. We've got all those physical reminders, you know, and you can turn to a colleague and have a chat if you think there's a phishing email. But when you're working from home, those are all stripped away. So A, they're stripped away, and B, you've got all those other challenges in the background, especially with homeschooling. So I think that's certainly an area where just the more we can empower and encourage and educate our employees and help them understanding that, you know, don't ever be complacent. We always say in our sort of training, you know, healthily paranoid. We don't want people to be so scared that they don't switch on their desktops. Of course, we don't want to come to work, do their job, do it securely. We want a little bit of healthy paranoia. You know, don't ever be complacent. Always know that fear, that sort of uncertainty, the reward that you get in the phishing email. Just always be a little bit paranoid, question why. And working from home, we're just doing everything we can through gamified, immersive, participatory campaigns, you know, using bite-sized modules, really getting them engaged, incentivizing them, just trying to get it to keep it front of mind without spamming them. So it's always going to be a balance, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very, as you say, a balanced answer, a very good answer for that question. Ian, just that final question then, which I believe was, is there anywhere we can go? I know for ransomware training, maybe that's a bit specific, but I know that Cyjax do an excellent threat intelligence platform and are engaged in all things across that area. I don't know if you can elaborate on his question for us, or her question, apologies.
Well, I think if you're not phishing your own employees and seeing if you can drive measurable results from an awareness campaign, your organization is going to be really at risk. I think email phishing, when you look at and digest the mountain of information that's out there, we're talking about 70 to 80% of business impactful cyber attacks come via email. So, you know, if you think about what the most likely attack vector is, it's going to be on your people. It's going to be, you know, in the form of business email compromise, and it's going to be in the form of a link or an attachment. And so there's two things. There's one, you know, invest in the people, trust your people, and educate your people. Super important. But then there's the challenge on the security technical side. You know, big believer in threat intelligence, but after the threat intelligence works or doesn't work, and you manage to thwart an attack, your infrastructure, you should know it really well. If you should probably know it better than the actors that may be attacking you. So hint, hint. There's also a great program from the NCSC that will allow you to enumerate your own infrastructure that you own. So there's that aspect. And then the last piece of it is this. Dispel the idea for your enterprise IT people and IT security people that if it's not on your network, it's not a threat. If it's in the hands of your employees, it's potentially a threat. So be kind, be benevolent, and figure out how to support Sky VPN, VPN services through Sky, VPN services through BT, change the DNSs on all of your folks to, like, you know, 4 9s or 4 1s. so that they are getting the benefit of your enterprise IT people and the security people saying, hey, why don't we just try and improve the security of those networks that now we're kind of responsible for, and don't get all political. Well, if it's not Cisco, I'm not touching it. Well, guess what? You know, now it's time to come out of your comfort zone a little bit and look after those senior VPs that are all working from home, because at the end of the day, your career advancement will be as a result of being in a crisis situation, leading your business to prosperity and victory. Think of that as the narrative, other than, oh, well, we don't touch home networks. Guess what? Yeah. You do now. So redefine your mission.
I think, indeed, I was thinking, guess what you do now is a great ending phrase for the webinar. So if we can leave you on that hiatus, thank you very much, everyone who has attended today's webinar. We really appreciate you tuning in, and a particular thanks to everyone who's joined us for the whole series. Thank you to everyone on the panel. That was really interesting to hear your thoughts. I hope I've done a good enough job, my colleagues have done a good enough job of posting where people can find more about you in your various places online, because you're all very worth listening to again. And if nothing else, please head over to the SASIG website, where you can get really interesting webinars that will continue past the end of our series and give you a good awareness of security. Before I leave you, again, I wanted to thank the police forces around the country and the regional teams around the country who have worked hard to bring you a very eclectic and informative range of presentations over the last couple of months. Thank you to all of the officers and staff who made that possible. My particular thanks to the two gentlemen who have just appeared in your screen there. You have Dave Humphreys and Richard Atkins, who, it pains me to say, have done an excellent job and have worked tirelessly to bring every single one of these webinars. So gents, you are now free, and thank you very much for an incredible job on the webinar series. In closing, I will talk to you very briefly about feedback. When you end the webinar, you'll see that the option to give feedback pops up. I know it's a pain to do feedback, but it would be great to get your thoughts on this webinar, and very particularly if you want a second series or whether one was enough. So again, thank you to everyone who joined us today, and thank you to our panelists and my colleagues who made this all possible. I'm afraid, though, that's it for us for now. Goodbye.